The final years of the Old Republic were marked by the betrayal of the values upon which it had been founded. The dedication to justice, culture, and civic duty that for 1,000 years had maintained peace and balance across the galaxy rotted away under a tide of apathy and timidity. Senators who had vowed to advance the interests of their people instead grew enamored with fleeting distractions of fame and the cultivation of personal wealth. The core worlds grew vain and capricious, demanding ever more from those relegated to life on the rim, while those on the frontier became bitter, resenting a government increasingly distant and unfeeling. There was no victor in the Clone Wars. The conflict had laid bare to the galaxy the frailty of the Galactic Republic and the treachery of its most stalwart defenders. When the Confederacy of Independent Systems was finally destroyed and the Jedi Order overthrown, a new order was needed to preserve the galaxy that countless billions had fought and died to win. A decadent democracy was torn down, its corrupt institutions and abettors swept away. In its place rose a regime dedicated to pure ideals and a higher purpose. In all the ages past and since, no declaration has shaken the very foundations of the universe so much as the establishment of the first Galactic Empire. Many governments across history have claimed authority over the entire galaxy. Such affirmations were largely for symbolic or political purposes, and hardly an accurate reflection of the limits of their sovereignty. The Galactic Empire shared this same rhetoric, but for the first time, its words were strengthened by actions. In place of the amalgamation of planetary governments, industrial concerns, and corporate institutions that had shared authority within the Galactic Republic, Imperial rule embraced the centralization of political power. Planets that, under the Republic, had retained degrees of sovereignty were integrated directly into the Imperial bureaucracy. Coruscant had long been the traditional planetary capital of the galaxy, but as the Imperial throne world, its influence rose exponentially. The Galactic Empire existed as an autocracy, with supreme power vested in a single individual. For the majority of its history, this figure was Emperor Sheev Palpatine. The Emperor served as the head of state, head of government, and the supreme commander of the Imperial Armed Forces. His power was subject to neither external legal restraints or regulated by any mechanisms of public control. Policies affecting any aspect of the state could be unilaterally implemented at the Emperor's discretion. The uppermost levels of Imperial power structure were composed of both formal and informal institutions. The Imperial Ruling Council was a collective body of the Emperor's closest advisors and delegated considerable responsibilities in managing the daily affairs of the state. This group was headed by the Grand Vizier, one of the few individuals in the galaxy to have direct access to the Emperor. The Ruling Council, however, was merely a legitimized body made up from a larger, informal network of Imperial advisors known as the Imperial Court. It was made up of those who had garnered the favor of the Emperor, becoming the uppermost elite of Imperial society. While their power was technically restricted by the Imperial Charter, a document outlining the highest set of laws within the Galactic Empire, it was an unacknowledged fact that such individuals were above any legal constraint. The Imperial Senate, which served as the state's legislature, was likewise theoretically capable of limiting the authority of the Emperor and his ruling council. In the final days of the Clone Wars, Palpatine had been a strong proponent of democracy and the separation of powers. Nevertheless, under his governance, the checks and balances provided by the Senate were weakened, while political opponents of the regime were removed. In each instance, such changes were said to have been made in the interest of ending corruption and restoring stability. Ultimately, the Imperial Senate's powerlessness would be exposed when it was dissolved by the Emperor. In the place of the Senate, the Galactic Empire shifted authority directly to its regional governors. These were typically high-ranking members of the Imperial military. Imperial governors were required to report to the Imperial Ruling Council and ingratiate themselves with the Imperial Court, but the military would occasionally withhold sensitive information from the political elite. The Imperial military would be granted increased civil responsibilities over the course of the Empire's history, effectively turning the state into a pseudo-stratocracy. The armed forces themselves were divided into two major branches, the Imperial Army and the Imperial Navy. Both services were expected to work in close coordination with one another, yet a systemic inter-service rivalry existed between the two groups. This resulted in the development of parallel component services and overlapping responsibilities. The Imperial Army were the ground forces primarily utilized by the Galactic Empire during terrestrial campaigns. A direct evolution of the Grand Army of the Republic, the force that won the Clone Wars, the Imperial Army inherited much of its predecessors' equipment and doctrine. It maintained the Republic's combined arms approach, combining massed infantry with many variants of tracked vehicles, walkers, and starfighters. The Imperial Armor Corps was perhaps the most feared and well-known aspect of the Imperial Army, tasked with operating the Empire's imposing assortment of ground vehicles and walkers. The all-terrain armored transport, commonly known as the AT-AT, represented the apex of Imperial walker design. Its formidable armor and armament, combined with its ability to carry large numbers of infantry or equipment, made it a centerpiece of Imperial strategy and an enduring symbol of the Empire's military supremacy. The AT-AT was supplemented by a variety of other walkers and vehicles, including the all-terrain scout transport, or AT-ST, and the TX-225 GAVW Occupier assault tank. Aerial supremacy was the responsibility of the Imperial Army Air Corps. In addition to the TIE series of starfighters utilized by the Imperial Navy, the Air Corps were also equipped with variants designed specifically for atmospheric combat. Likewise, their assets were typically assigned to surface-based airfields, rather than any starship. The Stormtrooper Corps represented the elite of the Imperial Army, organized into a semi-independent service branch. While technically subordinate to Army Command, they were ubiquitous across the Galactic Empire, operating even in areas reserved for the Imperial Navy, including its starships and fleet bases. First established by units of Republic commandos, the deterioration of the clone army due to the accelerated aging of its soldiers necessitated the recruitment of regular Imperial citizens. The force would eventually swell in numbers to such an extent that it rivaled the scale and ability of the Imperial Army, but in the process, lose much of its institutional memory and elite status. A prodigious number of Stormtrooper variants existed through the Corps. Some of these, such as heavy Stormtroopers and Flame Troopers, were single individuals with distinct weaponry assigned to a squad or fire team of standard Stormtroopers. Others, such as Jump Troopers or Scout Troopers, were organized into separate squads, platoons, or even companies comprised entirely of identically equipped individuals. These variants' unique equipment and, in some cases, additional training was intended to increase their effectiveness in certain environments, such as in Arctic, volcanic, oceanic, or urban battlefields. While the Imperial Army maintained a limited space-based component necessary for the deployment of its surface forces, the Imperial Navy was exclusively capable of large-scale, sustained interstellar warfare. As the Galactic Empire's naval branch, it operated the hundreds of thousands of starships, starfighters, and bases necessary to maintain Imperial order across the galaxy. Like its sister services, it was a force built on the lessons of the Clone Wars, and structured in such a way to fight and win a conflict of similar scope. While the Imperial Navy inherited from the Galactic Republic a naval tradition dating back thousands of years, it adopted a radically different military doctrine. The Clone Wars had advanced the fields of ship design and naval tactics to such an extent that the most advanced starships at the outbreak of the conflict had been rendered obsolete by the war's end. In the first days of the Empire, the legendary Venator-class star destroyers used by the Republic were repainted in what would become standard Imperial gray, and within a few years, dismantled entirely. In scrapyards across the galaxy, Clone War-era starships were stripped for parts, and used to build what would become the largest military force ever assembled. The Empire's naval doctrine was focused around fleets of star destroyers, enormous vessels armed with powerful turbo-laser batteries, ion cannons, and a complement of starfighters. Vessels of a similar scale and versatility had been employed in conflicts spanning thousands of years of galactic history, but their use within the Empire was unprecedented. Star destroyers went from relatively uncommon flagships to the standard warship utilized within the service. While undoubtedly formidable in combat, they also served as a means of power projection, intimidating star systems into submission without firing a shot. Within a few years of their introduction, the Imperial 1 and later Imperial 2 class Star Destroyers had become the most recognizable symbol of Imperial power. The Imperial class were supplemented by dozens of other models of Star Destroyers alongside more traditional attack cruisers, frigates, corvettes, and a variety of auxiliary craft. As befitted the overarching strategy of the Imperial military, many of these were specialist warships designed to accomplish a specific task. The Interdictor-class Star Destroyer, for instance, was equipped with gravity well projectors capable of pulling starships out of hyperspace, while the Onager-class Star Destroyer was built as an orbital bombardment platform. While most Star Destroyers could serve as command vessels over a flotilla of smaller warships, coordinating fleets of Star Destroyers themselves necessitated a far larger vessel. The Executor-class Star Dreadnought, informally known as Super Star Destroyers, were among the largest warships ever built by the Galactic Empire. Each represented an exponential increase in firepower, starfighter complement, troop capacity, and endurance when compared to even the Imperial 1 or 2 class. While the exact number of such vessels was never made public, it is estimated fewer than 15 were ever built. In contrast to the overwhelming firepower and survivability favored in its capital ships, Imperial starfighters emphasized cost-effectiveness above all. The TIE series of starfighter had a near monopoly within Imperial service, with variants existing to fulfill every conceivable need. In most cases, starfighters part of the TIE line lacked an independent hyperdrive, life support system, shields, and featured a substandard armament. In exchange, they were highly maneuverable, and at the time of their introduction, several variants were among the fastest in the galaxy. They could also be produced in vast quantities and quickly deployed to every ship, station, and planet under Imperial rule. In several cases, individual Imperial commanders, dissatisfied with the swarm tactics the TIE line was built for, spearheaded projects favoring increased firepower or pilot survivability. The TIE Defender, had it been mass-produced, would have been one of the most capable multi-role starfighters ever put into service, while the TIE Interceptor further improved on the TIE line's tremendous speed and maneuverability, while greatly enhancing its offensive capabilities. Ultimately, however, both projects, and thousands like them across the Empire, were delayed, underfunded, or cancelled entirely to divert resources to Project Stardust. This was perhaps the largest, most ambitious operation in galactic history, the construction of moon-sized deep space mobile battle stations. The two stations, ultimately known as the DS-1 and DS-2, were the first successful implementation of what had been, until then, a purely theoretical idea dating back millennia to the time of the ancient Sith. In addition to a conventional armament of turbolasers and ion cannons numbering in the tens of thousands, each station was armed with a superlaser, a weapon capable of destroying an entire planet. These stations, it was hoped, would be the ultimate power in the universe, an invincible means of enforcing Imperial rule. Such projects, combined with the Galactic Empire's already unequal defense spending, were the consequence, at least in part, of its enormous military-industrial complex. Corporations such as Sinar Fleet Systems, responsible for the TIE line, and Kuat Drive Yards, the manufacturers of the Imperial Star Destroyers, enjoyed significant influence within Imperial politics, able to market every conceivable variant of Stormtrooper, Starfighter, or capital ship to eager Imperial officials. While critics of the Galactic Empire have repeatedly pointed to this level of runaway military spending as proof the regime was more concerned with the might of its military than the happiness of its citizens, life under Imperial rule varied tremendously from planet to planet. Some worlds, such as those which had been the fiercest combatants during the Clone Wars, existed under indefinite occupation. Each day, their citizens would be forced to endure grueling physical labor under a totalitarian regime, expected to devote themselves entirely to the good of the state. Other planets viewed as loyal to the Empire might be free to manage their own affairs. While it is impossible to deny many atrocities were committed under the authority of the Empire, year after year, on thousands of worlds, citizens lived their lives under Imperial rule without ever seeing a stormtrooper or hearing a TIE fighter scream overhead. At the center of imperial society was a political program known as the New Order. This ideology, first expressed in the Declaration of the Empire itself, espoused the values of patriotism, militarism, civic pride, order, and the rule of law. One of the main goals of this program was to degrade the traditional loyalty most citizens had to their planet and replace it with loyalty to the Empire above all. Citizens were encouraged to think of themselves not as Corellians, Naboo, or Chandrilan, but simply as Imperials. By leveraging populist sentiments and exploiting the rampant anti-droid and human-centric bigotry brought about by the Clone Wars, Imperial propaganda found a receptive audience. Humans came to dominate every aspect of Imperial society, with anti-alien media so effective that even mere humans came to distrust non-human populations. Nevertheless, in rare instances, some non-humans of exceptional ability were known to occupy some of the highest positions in both the civil government and military forces. Simultaneously, the fear of mysticism and the supernatural that had emerged in the final days of the Clone Wars was used to criminalize organized religion. Ancient religious groups such as the Church of the Force and the Guardians of the Wills were outlawed and driven underground. In its place, the Empire attempted to promote a type of civic religion in which elements of the imperial regime, including the Emperor himself, were imbued with a type of sacred reverence. Imperial history especially was, at times, either manipulated or perhaps fabricated entirely to help promote loyalty to the state. During the Imperial era, it was generally accepted that the Galactic Empire was the direct result of two major influences: the spiraling corruption of the Galactic Republic and the treason of the Republic's oldest defenders, the Jedi Order. In ancient religious society, the Jedi Order was said to be made up of warrior monks, Jedi Knights, who could manipulate a type of cosmic power known as the Force. These Jedi possessed supernatural abilities, used at one time to eradicate another group of Force users, known as the Sith. Near the end of the Clone Wars, one of these Jedi, a high-ranking member of a Jedi Council, purportedly attempted to assassinate then Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, Sheev Palpatine. Simultaneously, the thousands of Jedi Knights across the galaxy turned on their clone soldiers, only to be cut down and the Jedi Rebellion destroyed. The veracity of these claims has been increasingly challenged, with some claiming that it was the Republic that betrayed the Jedi, perhaps even at the behest of Chancellor Palpatine himself. Regardless, the early years of the Galactic Empire were focused on dismantling the institutions of the Republic and destroying the last holdouts of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, the secessionist state that had sparked the Clone Wars. Imperial control flourished during this time, matching and eventually surpassing the level of galactic integration achieved by the pre-war Republic. Despite these early successes, a growing insurrection, rumored to have been fermented by Jedi survivors, united those opposed to Imperial rule. In what would become a decades-long galactic civil war, Imperial forces attempted to hunt down and eradicate a series of rebel cells that would eventually proclaim themselves the Alliance to restore the Republic. In the Battle of Yavin, the Galactic Empire experienced its first great defeat. A single rebel pilot, rumored to be either a Jedi survivor or trained by one, was able to somehow destroy the DS-1, killing millions of Imperial soldiers and destroying an irreplaceable piece of the Empire's military infrastructure. While the Empire would achieve a stunning victory on Hoth, almost annihilating the entire rebellion in a single blow, the destruction of the second Death Star, and with it the Emperor himself, marked the beginning of the end of Imperial rule. Lacking a strong continuity of government, the death of the Emperor left no clear successor, with the remaining political authorities on Coruscant unable to secure the loyalty of the military. The Galactic Empire quickly fractured into several remnants, the largest of which, led by Grand Admiral Ray Sloane, attempted to achieve a major victory over the nascent New Republic to consolidate and legitimize her authority, only to be defeated during the Battle of Jakku. While several holdouts continued to resist, Imperial representatives on Coruscant formally capitulated to the New Republic, signing a treaty known as the Galactic Concordance. The Galactic Empire was reduced to a rump state, a shadow of its former power, and confined to a scant few systems granted to it by the victorious New Republic. Together with other Imperial remnants across the galaxy, it lays claim to the legacy of the old Empire, but with neither the resources or will to seize it. But the fall of the Empire has raised new questions. For decades, it was rumored that Emperor Palpatine may have himself commanded the Force used by the Jedi, that he may have even been a member of their ancient enemy, the Sith. A few strange records were preserved before they could be destroyed, detailing secret plans and ancient artifacts. There is evidence a shadow group may have operated under Imperial rule. It was an open secret that the Emperor had at his command a dark enforcer, a towering figure armored in black who could kill with a gesture. He may have commanded other such agents, inquisitors intended to hunt the last Jedi. Most concerning are the mentions of the unknown regions, the last truly unexplored territory in the galaxy, and a place of great interest to Palpatine. Imperial hardliners fled there in vast numbers, and the First Order is said to have been founded at their command. The First Order's destruction of the Hosnian system and their war against the New Republic has been waged in the desire to see the Galactic Empire's promise fulfilled. To many, they are its true successor. Others view them merely as a pale imitation, a hollow attempt to replicate the might of a far greater power. But the First Order alone cannot account for the vast number of ships, troops, and material that disappeared with the end of the Empire. If the Emperor was truly responsible for all of which he has been accused, the corruption of the Republic, the outbreak of the Clone Wars, the fall of the Jedi Order, if he did command powers beyond those of normal men, then who can truly say what else he may have been capable of? Whoever or whatever he is, Palpatine possessed enormous vision, and his plans for the galaxy may still be in motion. The Templin Institute investigates the factions, nations, and organizations of alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to join the Templin Institute, consider pledging to our Patreon page. Along with increased security access, you'll be able to vote in polls to determine future topics, get custom wallpaper every week, and receive some other exclusive rewards.